Hi everyone, I'm Adam Smythe, curator at Bluecoat. Very pleased to have Andrew Demetrius with us today. Andrew is Visual Resources Curator at the School of Arts at St Andrews University. The reason that actually Tom and Simon Gore kind of asked Andrew to be here. We're really grateful. So Andrew's going to talk about the educator Rowland, who's been kind of quite a big influence on Simon and Tom Gore's work. As many of you probably have already kind of figured out, there's not been a lot of kind of research kind of done on Kurt Rowland, so we're very, very glad to have Andrew here. Just like to say thank you to Andrew for kind of doing some thank you.
Hi everybody, I'd like to start off by saying thank you to Adam and Bluecoat and the artists, one of which is here today, Tom and Simon Gore, who invited me to come and speak. I'm going to talk about one of the sources of inspiration behind the exhibition downstairs, and around us here, but specifically the piece in the shop window downstairs, and delve into the past, but I also want to show the connections between the past and the present exhibition to the future. Art, A-R-T, is a serious business. Art for children is playful. It's easy for adults to forget play is a serious business, an essential means of learning, finding our place in life. It is this educational aspect, I suggest, that can connect all of this to the world outside. So, new possibilities in familiar situations. It's the title of a new work commissioned for this exhibition by artists Simon and Tom Gore. For the exhibition Abacus, which invites visitors to draw on the gallery walls and exercise our own creativity through the destruction or metamorphosis of their art. There are lots of things happening simultaneously with this work, and there are many approaches when we attempt to understand it. Putting aside the intricacies of art theory, concepts, partisan histories and contexts, how do we begin to make sense of this work at a base level? Well, we can touch it. Large pieces of chalk, walls. But we can't do that with most art. Our main sensory response is visual. Our eyes perceive objects and spaces in the gallery, and our brains filter and interpret this information according to our experience. The artists have conveniently provided us with a means of a deeper engagement with the visual process through the thinking at the source of this work. The shapes of the sculptures and painted forms derive from images in the books of Kurt Rowland, an experimental art educator and author of 3 series of classroom textbooks for schools on visual literacy, all written in a burst of productivity that lasted just a dozen years between 1964 and 1973, and then disappeared into virtual obscurity. He was a man battered by the struggles that tore Europe apart in the first half of the 20th century, and he was inspired by the creative forces of modernism to find a means of uniting splintered elements in the years that followed. Rowland's other books, Theory and Polemics, further examine the place of visual education within general education, and its special importance in encouraging creative responses in all spheres, and the relationship between visual education and concept formation, issues of unconscious perception, non-conceptual abstract thinking, and in the service of creativity. This talk looks at the historical work of Rowland and how it might inspire a contemporary audience with reference to the Abacus exhibition, visual literacy, and creativity in the school curriculum and beyond. Just to set the scene a little bit here, the Department of Education's statutory guidance on the national curriculum for art in England states that as school pupils progress, they should develop their creativity and critical thinking, and should evaluate and analyse creative works using the language of art, craft and design. Since 2010, Education Scotland's Curriculum for Excellence aims to help pupils to become successful learners, confident individuals, responsible citizens, effective contributors. The framework puts the learner at the centre of the curriculum. The American Department of Education National Core Art Standards has 4 components. 2 of these, creating and presenting, are familiar to our teachers. Responding and connecting elements of visual literacy may be harder to understand and put into practice. All of these curricula would appear to have a place for visual education, to move pupils beyond mere recognition, to improve perception and critical thinking, and to aid student-centred learning and stimulate creativity. So what do we mean by visual literacy? Well, it's a rather contested area. Disciplines such as art history, philosophy, psychology, semiotics and graphic design are struggling to take charge, but it's of particular relevance to education. The Wikipedia definition suggests visual literacy is the ability to interpret, negotiate and make meaning from information presented in the form of an image, extending the meaning of literacy, which commonly signifies an interpretation of text. Visual literacy is based on the idea that pictures can be read and that meaning can be inferred through a process of reading. Art historian James Elkins defines visual literacy a little more succinctly as understanding how people perceive objects, interpret what they see, and then learn from them. The term visual literacy is credited to John Deebs, co-founder of the International Visual Literacy Association in America. In 1969, Deebs offered a tentative definition. Visual literacy refers to a group of vision competencies a human being can develop by seeing and at the same time having and integrating other sensory experiences. Well, Kurt Rowland was ahead of Deebs, using the term visual grammar to mean something very similar 5 years earlier, in 1964. So, to better understand the man and his work, we should consider Rowland's background and the events that motivated him to become an educator and to create his publishing concern. Kurt was born in 1920 into a secular Jewish family in Vienna, where his early schooling formed the basis of his aesthetics and sensibilities. He began to acquire practical skills after leaving school at age 14 to study technical engineering in Brno, in what is now the Czech Republic, and experiencing Central European modernist design. However, his education was interrupted 2 years later by conflict in 1936, when he joined his father to fight with the Republican Army in the Spanish Civil War. The visceral horrors that he saw made a lasting impression on the sensitive young man. As the Republicans faced defeat, Rowland fled to France and was interred until granted refugee status and allowed to join his mother, who had moved to Britain from Austria to escape the Nazis. As an Austrian, he was declared a friendly enemy alien and then promptly shipped to Australia for a year, narrowly avoiding a Nazi torpedo attack en route. It was in the Antipodean camps that he began to draw and paint and to learn English. On returning to the UK in 1941, he was conscripted and enlisted in the British Army stationed in Yorkshire, where he attended classes at the Wakefield College of Art, eventually enrolling for a degree in 1945 and winning a postgraduate scholarship to the Slade School of Art in London in 1948. He was a contemporary of Richard Hamilton, Edoardo Paolozzi and Nigel Henderson, all of whom proceeded to revolutionise the British art scene by challenging the modernist, as they saw it, elitist culture dominant at the time, in order to make it more inclusive of popular culture. Rowland cleaved to a more hardline modernist approach. He had met his future wife Mona as a fellow student at Wakefield, and she had accompanied him. She also won a place at the Slade. And they married, and after graduating and becoming a naturalised British citizen, Mona worked as a school teacher, while Kurt taught part-time higher education at Walthamstow, Watford and Southend art colleges, later becoming visiting emeritus lecturer at Hornsey College of Art's teacher training course. During the 50s and 60s, Rowland maintained a parallel career as a graphic designer and commercial artist, producing works for textile manufacturers, television and print media. In 1962, he was working for Wiedenfeld and Nicholson Publishers as an editor, an impressive feat given English was his third language after German and Spanish, editing a series of introductory science books for schools. And it was this project that inspired his thoughts to coalesce around the concept of a series of visual education books. He approached his industry contacts with his proposal. Many liked the idea, but dismissed it as a non-subject, as not part of the curriculum and therefore not financially viable. Rowland felt so strongly this was a goal worth pursuing that he determined to establish his own publishing company. focus and language of his books suggest how strongly Rowland felt about product design and the urban environment, and their practical and psychological effects on the general population, no doubt in part because of his own peculiar sensitivity to his surroundings. His son, Paul, in the audience here today, recalls his father being appalled by the insensitive developments to the environment. Quote, the Looking and Seeing project came about as a result of his horror, no exaggeration, at the vulgarity and visual incoherence of the kind of mass-produced artefacts that began flooding the market in huge quantities in the 1950s. He felt this phenomenon to be particularly exacerbated in Britain, where, in his opinion, the qualities of imagination and aesthetic sensibility had traditionally been held in low esteem. Rowland's experience in higher education convinced him of the pressing need for improvement through new visual strategies in conventional classroom teaching. Through his books and lobbying of teachers and industry, he hoped to change the trajectory, to take a revolutionary approach to education as a means to improve society's health and the visual environment which he felt was being vandalised. The implications went far beyond what most people think of as visual education. He wished for a holistic re-education of society from the bottom up, beginning with his youth. He was well equipped for the task. His education and commercial art experience had given him the abilities with which to craft visually well-designed publications. His editing had proven he could write, and his lecturing at art schools had given him teaching experience and motivation to try to improve the current system. Rowland continued to teach, but scaled back his design work to concentrate on his own project. To give a little bit of background here, many of the influences on Rowland's work and his thinking are mentioned explicitly in his books, including the art theorists and educators Herbert Reed, Marion Richardson, Rudolf Arnheim, the architectural historian Siegfried Giedion, and Paramount artist Paul Klee. Rowland's aesthetics and sensibilities were informed by his Viennese schooling, European design, and British art schools. Perhaps the most important influence in terms of his visual education theory was the Bauhaus School, and the Bauhaus book of the Bauhaus Books, pedagogical publications designed by the artist Laszlo Moholy-Nagy. Rowland was revisiting the modernist agenda of the previous generation at the Bauhaus under Walter Gropius and Johannes Itten, Vasily Kandinsky and Moholy-Nagy, and bringing it to a fresh audience. The influence of the short-lived Bauhaus took some years to percolate through the traditionalist British art school system. For example, Kandinsky and Klee's publications were only translated into English in 1949 and 1953, respectively. That's 29 years after they were published in German. Rowland was a contemporary of Richard Hamilton at the Slade and would have presumably encountered some of the progressive modernist ideas that were currently circulating. They both read Joyce's Ulysses. Hamilton certainly had knowledge of the Bauhaus, and alongside Victor Pasmore, he adapted elements of the introductory foundation course, or Vorkurs, the teachings of Itten, Klee, and Moholy-Nagy, and he went on to lecture at King's College Durham, now University of Newcastle, reformulating part of the loose pedagogic system that we refer to as basic design, begun by William Johnson at Camberwell and Central Art Schools in London, moving away from teaching technique towards experimentation and abstraction. As originally conceived, artist teachers like Hamilton were motivated by their own creative needs, for at the Bauhaus, artists worked alongside their students, establishing unique creative atmospheres. Certainly, Rowland's work should be viewed in conjunction with basic design, in that both took inspiration from the Bauhaus with the intention of introducing expressive, non-objective art to a youth audience. But could artist teachers be replicated through textbooks? Or could these books augment conventional art teachers? Rowland's research for his books was thorough and led him to correspond directly with Bauhaus founder Walter Gropius for advice. Rowland pitched his ideas towards teaching art and design classes in primary and secondary schools. His overarching vision, as I said, was more holistic, encompassing the entire man-made visual environment, the history and evolution of design, architecture, town planning, and art. He wanted to offer a means by which students could comprehend their entire visual world, and wanted all school subjects to use elements of visual education. And in this, he appears to have been ahead of his time, as I'll discuss further. His first series of 4 books, Looking and Seeing, each volume accompanied by by a book of Notes for Teachers. It was intended to be the first course of school textbooks on visual education ever published in the UK, to provide, quote, training in visual understanding and discrimination, not a course in design appreciation, end quote, to help the reader's understanding of their environment and promote new means of self-expression and stimulate creative and positive attitudes. Parts 1 and 2 would analyse what Rowland called visual grammar and the elements that make up our visual world. So pattern and shape, Rowland used the world around us, familiar, to engage the readership. The examination of patterns, materials, shapes in everyday life provide a means of accessing concepts, environments, character, perception, and form. Book 2, The Development of Shape, a closer examination of form in the evolution of design technology from the Stone Age to modern consumer goods and architecture. Exemplar designs, such as the Royal Festival Hall building, or even a pair of garden secateurs, illustrate the integration of pattern, form, and function. Parts 3 and 4 discussed how these concepts might be applied to the educated mind in making informed judgments. The Shapes We Need saw the concepts grow more complex, looking at the development of man-made design through mathematics and the evolution of visual language from medieval to modern times, and elements of semiotics. Book 4, The Shape of Towns, looked at towns and cities as the most powerful expression of the man-made environment, decoding the urban world about us through historical developments, medieval, Renaissance, Baroque, to present-day new towns. Rowland argues that an artistic solution has always been required to ensure organisational and emotional efficiency. The role of the designer is crucial, as their mistakes will be an affliction on the population for years to come. The smaller Notes for Teachers acted as an expanded commentary on the textbooks, giving detailed background information to support teachers wishing to enlarge upon the subjects and help field questions that may arise in the classroom, I have to say, in greater detail than any teacher would ever require. In the context of the curriculum, the question of intended readership age is apparent here. The concepts and information presented illustrate complex solutions for complex problems, more intellectually demanding than many school children can probably comfortably process. This would suggest that looking and seeing textbooks would require some explication by the teachers for their class, or were perhaps better suited to undergraduate students. In the introduction for the Notes for Teachers books, Rowland is keen to encourage contextualization of the course with other subjects within the school curriculum, wherever appropriate. So history, geography, mathematics, not just art, to encourage greater meaning by association and to suggest, quote, all fields of knowledge are somehow part of the same endeavour. Books 1 to 3 contained a small number of exercises at the end of each chapter, which Rowland viewed as an essential part of the course. These covered a range of techniques: observation and drawing, oral questions, discussion and abstraction, puzzles, observational inquiries. He suggested the results be recorded in notebooks so pupils and teachers could refer back to earlier exercises and see their progress. The approach should be informal and spontaneous, as he saw the stimulation of individual initiatives to be the most valuable part of the course, rather than rote learning. The books aspired to an uncluttered modern design aesthetic, but I have to say it's somewhat compromised by the sheer amount of information that the reader is asked to process. They're quite dense. Towards the end of the 50s, Rowland had gained sufficient reputation to become a member of the Society of Industrial Artists and Designers, which is now the Chartered Society of Designers, the professional body for art designers in the UK. And following the attention of Looking and Seeing books, he was invited to address their annual conference in June '66. The speeches at the event were published in A Total Visual Education, where Rowland made his case for persuading the Society to take an active part in the promotion of visual education as a school subject, emphasising the importance of both sensuous experience in learning and visual literacy, mixing philosophical and moral arguments to some effect. He received positive support for the most part from fellow speakers, but there was a distinct note of caution from the National Union of Teachers representative, who warned against unrealistic utopianism and reminded the audience of the many other conflicting demands and legitimate constraints on the curriculum and on the greater society. Indeed, he questioned whether it was teachers or society that Rowland was challenging. The debate continued in Design Journal, arguing that visual education required a clear vision and concerted efforts to move, quote, conference theorising into the world of practical politics, and suggesting, quote, if it, the education system, lacks the emphasis on visual education which Kurt Rowland pleads for, and for which most of us wish, this is largely because society does not value it, or is unconscious of its own visual illiteracy. Rowland took time to digest the criticism that followed, and possibly some debates at Hornsey School of Art, where he was teaching. This was 1968, the year of the Paris riots and notorious student protests at the college, and the desire for change was in the air. His next book, Educating the Senses, was a text-heavy exposition on the need for art education reform to reunify our increasingly fractured society. Designed for teachers, it can be understood as a polemical response to the previous discussions and as a marketing device, summarising the intent of his forthcoming series, Learning to See. In the essay, Rowland believed that a certain amount of abstraction was needed, but cautioned basic design's, quote, mere stimulation, end quote, for the development of abstract visual skill without affecting levels of creativity or the solving of real-life problems. He concludes that a child's material and emotional efficiency depends on visual education. The nurturing of intuitive, unconscious faculties to solve visual problems rather than rational, deductive or inductive reasoning for improved inspiration and creativity. Quote, visual education cannot be started too soon, he thunders in the last sentence. The next series of 5 books is Learning to See. The introduction states, Learning to See embodies the author's experience of his environment, judged according to contemporary cultural values. Each textbook had their own accompanying pupil exercise book and notes for teachers. There is a sense that this work was aimed at a younger age group, although no age is specified, which leaves open the possibility the course could be adapted for any age. As before, the books were entirely designed by Rowland to the highest standard, this time in full colour. The layout is simpler than Looking and Seeing, with less text in sans serif typeface and more space around the text and images. The chapters are untitled. Themes reveal themselves through process, suggesting a softening of the harsher didacticism of Looking and Seeing, with concepts building gradually for easier comprehension and moving in sequence to assemble more complex ideas. Book 1 sees shape, pattern, form, and texture in nature and art. Instructions for drawing exercises are incorporated into the main body of text, test perception and observation. Most images are photographs or drawings made by felt tip marker pens, deliberately simple media accessible to children's experience. Artworks and mass-produced designs, such as wallpaper and ceramics, appear alongside to encourage free association. The same concepts appear in Book 2 in 3 dimensions, adding light and shade, composition and product design, sculpture and architecture. Classroom exercises involve the building of 3D paper sculptures and use sculptures such as Brian Neal and Henry Moore as inspirational studies. Book 3 looks at movement, speed, growth and change. How can these, the themes of modernity, be expressed in 2 and 3 dimensions? Examining the depiction of movement in art using line, symbolic here, and shape, concluding with 3D exercises, drawing with wire and plaster. Book 4 continues this theme, 3D concepts of space, volume, composition, and visual rhythm. The last book looks at structure, visual communications, and colour theory. The final volume offers us summing up, progressing from abstract exercises to add mood, feeling, and expression, moving beyond the verbal to the purely visual. The area in which we work is inaccessible to words, Rowland remarks. The accompanying teacher books was smaller in black and white and landscape format, and suggested flexibility in all exercises in the use of drawing to record visual thinking rather than visual likeness, drawing on models made in the classroom based on those illustrated in the textbooks. The commentary offered less detailed extrapolation of ideas than looking and seeing, focusing instead on instructions for classroom assignments and possible exercise book answers, guiding but not prescriptive. The answers are filled in here. There was no workbook for Book 5, a deliberate move to encourage individual, freely adapted work. Rowland envisaged this as the true purpose of his project, and this detaching was essential for the future progress of students to produce autonomous learners, the goal of all education. Sight and Insight was the final practical visual education course designed by Rowland, intended for use in secondary school art classes, and to be adapted to fit the curriculum or augment it, and for each project book to provide work for about a year, assuming 2 hours a week. It was, in essence, a refined version of the Learning to See course for older children and adults, and was likewise designed to encourage engagement with the environment as a source of learning, and to use this experience as a source for creative work. The visual material and projects were broad enough to allow many different approaches according to need and ability, and encourage, quote, instinctual faculties which are little extended in other work. As before, there is a cross-reference to other cultural phenomena and imaginative use of ordinary, everyday visual experience. It was originally envisaged as a four-book set, but only the first 2 were completed. The visual material projects, however, the method of presentation had been modified. The textbooks reverted to black and white, which remains black and white images, which remain dominant over the text. But each textbook was accompanied by 4 sets of 35mm slides and 1/4-inch audio tape recordings narrated by the author. And it was these tapes that shifted this project from progressive thinking in terms of visual literacy towards progressive presentation format. This was modern technology in 1974. The use of video was still in its infancy and not yet broken out of the art school laboratories into the mainstream. The combination of colour slides and sound added dynamism to the project. Rowland's monologue driving his arguments forward with occasional digressions in the sides, images building in sequence to animate each point. In the teaching notes, Rowland offered loose suggestions as to how the slides and commentary might be used best, emphasising these should always precede the use of textbooks. Visual is prioritised. The textbook page layouts featured thumbnail reproductions of the slide images and excerpts from the commentary as an aid memoir, sitting aside the main text and images, restating the themes of the commentary and providing a variety of exercises. The teaching notes are very slight compared with looking and seeing teachers' books, only 14 pages of stapled text, beginning with suggestions on how the course material may be employed, followed by a very brief synopsis of the themes by section. The answers, as such, to the project book exercises follow and elaborate very little on the project book text, usually suggesting variations in approach and details about an artist or other contextual information. It's much looser than before. The reviewer of the course in the Times Educational Supplement observed, quote, "The argument evolves primarily through images, which are given an essential dominance in the teaching situation. This is closely linked to environmental projects, which allow for the widest possible use of simple materials." Artworks and design objects were not included just as examples of art, but rather as illustrations of points in the argument, not intended to influence the student's pure expression. This lack of explanation or connection with artworks proved contentious, as we shall see. So this is just a collage of one single slide strip. On the left here we have a history of the modern movement. Rowland completed the first survey of modernism in schools and colleges, looking at work from the late 19th century arts and crafts through Art Nouveau and up to the 1930s Bauhaus. These books exist as a slightly sort of discrete project, which I can't really cover today due to time restraints, but I'm including just for the sake of completeness. There is, again, a copy at the back of the room there you can look at afterwards. And in 1976, Rowland published Visual Education and Beyond. This was not a classroom textbook, but a collection of his thoughts on visual education, his philosophy, and something of a manifesto. Visual education should not replace art in schools, but should inform art and other subjects. He had completed the practical classroom courses and provided a condensed and accessible art historical context of modernism, and now presented an academic text which provided a summing up of his ideas on the position of visual education within general education, and which gave further context for his understanding of child psychology and cognitive development. It also gave an opportunity to reflect on his work thus far and include some positive feedback from studies that had used his education resources. Sadly, further work was curtailed when Rowland's wife Mona died in 1977. Without their emotional and working partnership and his fundamental reliance on her support, Rowland withdrew from the world. Future projects, including a book on his inspiration, Paul Klee, had been discussed, but such undertakings proved impossible without his partner. He had no desire to outlive her, and sadly Kurt Rowland took his own life in 1980. He was 60 years old. The looking and seeing era was relatively short, only around a dozen years from the mid-60s to mid-70s, and without Rowland's drive to push the visual education project forwards and no other partners, his publishers allowed it to perish. Thinking about context and reception, it's very hard to gauge the reception of any of Rowland's books in the classroom. There are no sales figures that I know of, not much sense of geographical distribution, no record whether it was taken up by specific local education authorities or individual schools. It seems apparent that Rowland could make a decent living from his work, and the teaching as well, but it's difficult to speculate further on the commercial success of the project. Book reviews were generally favourable, and though some had minor criticism, questioned where the books fitted into the curriculum, the response from teachers and students using the text is also largely unknown, with only a handful of references discovered to date pending on further research. I include one example here, which I believe is quite telling. The late 60s and 70s were challenging times in culture and society, and in the spheres of art and education, the ascent of postmodernism presented challenges to the status quo of modernism. In a book called Teaching Art in a Postmodern World, Theories, Teacher Reflections, and Interpretive Frameworks, teachers gave recollections of the changes involved in their personal motivation and experience. The head of art and design at a school in Kent was representative of others in his critique of the adoption of modernist theories by teachers, including basic design, for producing results that superficially looked like real art, but failed to cultivate true creativity. Hall had used Rowland's books in the classroom and praised their promotion of modernist design values and encouragement of individual expression, but felt that this was undermined by a failure to introduce enough work by actual artists. Quote, "By the end of year 9, when you had done all of Rowland's books, students started exam courses and were given the opportunity to do their own thing. They just went off and copied record album covers. They didn't connect because basic design was a hands-off thing. The notion was that students should learn the skills first, and then they would have the vocabulary to express themselves. But what did they have to express? They didn't know what art looked like, or what people should be trying to do. The only artwork they came into contact with regularly were in cartoons and the latest album covers of their favourite band. They didn't really know what was possible." Despite Rowland's efforts to design flexible modernist courses, Hall praised the improved versatility of subsequent postmodern approaches that evolved in the 80s, the ability to take elements from Rowland or basic design without the constraints of an overarching philosophy, adding elements of multiculturalism and other art movements in a pragmatic manner to augment the curriculum. Postmodernism was in the ascendant, and modernism was quickly transformed from a progressive project to a stale relic, the institution to kick against. In reflecting on Kurt's work, I'd say he was a crusader for change in education and the man-made environment, attempting to engage the world from art colleges or his home office in suburban North London. He had experienced revolution in the form of world conflict and wanted a different kind of change, a revolution of mind and spirit. Are the books now historical artifacts? Are elements still taught or worth reviving? Certainly, they're evidence of past attitudes and worthy of historical study. Perhaps the best parts of the courses, such as Rowland's basic design, retain a universal quality and were incorporated into curricula in subsequent years. Although Rowland could never have imagined the way in which the world has changed since his time, I would suggest that the digital revolution we are currently living in, with its proliferation of images and reliance on the visual, may be the time where his ideas are relevant again. The teaching of numeracy and linguistic literacy is regarded as the basic standard expectation of the school education. But as technology advances rapidly, a number of educators are advocating the teaching of visual literacy as a key part of life in the information age. The STEM curriculum, science, technology, engineering and maths, was introduced to better prepare pupils for the challenges of the 21st century. It is argued that these subjects should be augmented with art, in the middle there, visual art and expressive arts, moving STEM to STEAM, integrating art and design as standalone subjects, but also as binding agents across all other subjects in the curriculum. There are already elements of Rowland's thinking in practice. The Scottish Curriculum for Excellence is designed to create opportunities for developing skills for learning, skills for life, skills for work, with a continuous focus on literacy, numeracy, and health and well-being. Why not add a continuous visual component? The National Curriculum for England states pupils should be taught to create sketchbooks to record their observations, to use them to review ideas. Self-expression, personal response should be encouraged, critical and technical language developed. Kurt would approve. Further studies about Kurt Rowland and other historical education programs may yield useful ideas for the design of STEAM curricula with a holistic art and visual literacy component, providing a consistent creative visual stimulus to all subject areas in 21st century education. As with art for children, education for children can find new possibilities in familiar surroundings.